Tonight on CTV News, provincial government workers issue strike notice.
Civil servants keep British Columbians safe, and they help drive the engine of our economy.
Job action could begin as early as Tuesday. What services could be impacted and what the province is saying.
What happens when a country reaches its breaking point? Not just in one city, not just in one sector, but everywhere at once. In Canada right now, that nightmare is becoming reality. Tens of thousands of workers, from wildfire crews risking their lives in brutal conditions to social workers holding together fragile communities, have all raised their fists and said one word: enough. And the result? A strike wave so powerful it has sent shockwaves through Ottawa and left Mark Carney scrambling for control. This isn't just another labor dispute. It's a test of survival for Canada's economy, its political stability, and even its national identity. With 92% of provincial workers in British Columbia ready to walk off the job, services that millions depend on every single day, like firefighting, healthcare, and transportation, are hanging by a thread. Families are staring at empty grocery carts, airports are bracing for chaos, and classrooms could be shut down before the first bell even rings. At the center of the storm stands Mark Carney, once hailed as a financial genius, now accused of being tone-deaf, out of touch, and unable to stop the bleeding. Some say he looks less like a leader and more like a man presiding over a slow-motion collapse. But the truth is, this is bigger than just one politician. This is about decades of broken promises, wages that never kept up with inflation, and an entire system that workers say has failed them. And here's the real question. Is this the moment Canada finally cracks? It all started in British Columbia, where Canada's public service unions delivered a crushing blow to the government. An unbelievable 92% of workers voted in favor of walking off the job. Think about that. Almost every single worker in a massive provincial union saying they're ready to shut it all down. This wasn't just a few angry employees. It was an army of civil servants preparing to put their tools down. And these weren't jobs you could just replace overnight. We're talking about wildfire crews risking their lives, social workers holding together struggling families, clerks keeping government services running, and even the people running liquor stores that entire communities depend on. If they walk, everything from public safety to daily convenience collapses with them. The timing couldn't be worse. Airports like YVR were already struggling with record-breaking crowds, up to 90,000 passengers in a single day. BC ferries warned of massive traffic spikes before a single picket line even went up. The system was already stretched to its limits. Add a wave of strikes, and suddenly, the whole province looks like it's teetering on collapse. Behind all the statistics and headlines, there's a human story. Wildfire fighters, people who literally risk their lives in burning forests, are being paid around $28 an hour. That's barely enough to pay rent in Vancouver, let alone cover fuel, groceries, and childcare. One union leader said it bluntly: "Our members can't afford to live where they work. They can't afford much of anything anymore." That frustration isn't just about money, it's about dignity. Imagine putting your life on the line to save homes from wildfires, only to go home and wonder if you can pay your own rent. And it wasn't just firefighters. Social workers said they were drowning in caseloads while living paycheck to paycheck. Clerical staff said their wages had fallen so far behind inflation that taking a second job was becoming the norm. Families across the province felt trapped, working full-time but still falling behind. But here's the real danger. This wasn't an isolated crisis in BC. What started in one province was about to spread across the entire country. As BC workers prepared to walk, others across Canada were already gearing up. In Alberta, Teachers openly discussed strike action as negotiations broke down. At Canada Post, unions braced for another round of bitter disputes. Even Air Canada staff pushed back against a federal back-to-work order, a move that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. And it wasn't just frontline workers. Highly specialized professionals, engineers, scientists, psychologists, also signaled they were ready to strike. These aren't roles you can fill with a quick job posting. They require years of training, and yet even they said their wages had fallen so far behind that government couldn't hire or keep staff anymore. At universities, another crisis brewed. A collapse in foreign student enrollment gutted campuses across the country. Programs were slashed, staff were laid off, and entire communities that depended on these institutions were suddenly at risk. Piece by piece, sector by sector, Canada's stability looked less like a foundation and more like a house of cards. So where was Mark Carney during all of this? Reports described him as furious behind closed doors, demanding answers from negotiators. But publicly, his message was simple. Agreements should be reached quietly, behind closed doors. To workers, that sounded like code for stall until you give up. And that perception was deadly. Carney, once praised as a steady hand on the economy, now looked tone-deaf, like a detached banker who didn't understand the struggles of ordinary Canadians. Union leaders called his approach insulting. Workers saw his calm speeches about fiscal responsibility as proof that he wasn't listening. Every day he refused to act, the anger grew louder. And for Carney, the risk wasn't just losing control of negotiations, it was losing the trust of an entire nation. But what made things even worse was the growing realization that this wasn't just about wages or contracts. Everywhere you looked, cracks were showing. Public safety was already stretched thin. Drownings in BC hit record levels, often linked to alcohol and drugs. Police warned of scams targeting vulnerable communities. Schools in fast-growing areas like Langley scrambled to build thousands of new seats for students, but were years behind. Each story might have looked separate, but together they painted a picture of a country already at capacity, a system trembling under its own weight. And when you zoom out even further, the truth becomes clear. This wasn't a sudden crisis. It was decades in the making. For years, wages barely moved while housing costs exploded. Pensions and benefits were chipped away. Job security became a luxury. The strike wasn't just about today. It was about all the broken promises of the past 30 years finally crashing down at once. And then came the political nightmare. Workers didn't just compare themselves to their parents or grandparents. They compared themselves to workers south of the border. In the United States, wages were climbing. New projects were breaking ground. Energy was booming. There was optimism in the air. And Donald Trump's message of workers first resonated far beyond his base. Canadians looked at that and thought, why not us? Why can't we have that too? Carney insisted Canada couldn't follow the American path. But every strike vote, every walkout, made that argument harder to sell. Opposition voices sharpened their attacks. Carney was losing the narrative. And Ottawa's greatest fear wasn't just strikes. It was the possibility that these strikes could evolve into something far more dangerous, a political revolt. History shows how quickly unrest spreads. One group stands up, then another, until small disputes turn into national movements. Canada had seen it before, from truckers paralyzing Ottawa to liquor workers shutting down supply chains. Now, the risk was a wave of strikes rippling across every province, uniting teachers, postal workers, airline staff, engineers, and firefighters in one nationwide push. And if that anger at the bargaining table transformed into anger at the ballot box, Carney's entire political project could unravel. Strikes can be negotiated, but elections, once lost, can end careers permanently. So here's where Canada stands. Tens of thousands of workers unified like never before, a government that looks paralyzed, and a leader in Mark Carney who's quickly losing credibility. The strikes aren't just about wages, they're about trust. They're about whether Canadians believe their leaders can actually defend them in a crisis. If Canada can't find a compromise now, then the next election may decide more than just who sits in office. It may decide whether the country itself can hold together under the weight of its own promises. And that's the real danger, because once people stop believing, no speech, no deal, no promise will be enough to put the pieces back together again.